Welcome into another edition of Talkin Dawgs here on YouTube. This is Robbie Falk from the Starkville Daily News and 247sports.com. Thank you guys, as always, for checking in over here, for subscribing if you do that as well. This week, not going to have a live chat. Going to put everything right here in this video. There's a lot to talk about regarding Mississippi State sports, especially on the football side of things, as the coaching staff in the roster is now rounding out for Mississippi State. You're starting to see everything kind of come together for the Bulldogs, and Zach Arnett's first official team and his first official coaching staff is basically intact at this point. 15 new enrollees are in school now, whether it be freshmen, the transfer portal, junior college guys. Mississippi State brought in 15 of those guys. Huge class that the Bulldogs brought in as early enrollees, probably the biggest that we've seen regarding Mississippi State. And, of course, from the coaching standpoint, it looks like everything is settled for Zach Arnett. There was a lot of questions about what would happen with Jason Washington at running backs, where was Tony Hughes going to be, who was going to be in certain other positions as well, and that stuff came to light earlier this week, and we will kind of break everything down. Had a chance to be on campus on Saturday with our guy Paul Jones over at 247, who does a great job for us in the recruiting side of things. Went over there to help him out a little bit with Junior Day and kind of see who was on campus for Mississippi State from a recruiting standpoint. Big group over there. Paul has a list of a lot of those guys that came in. We had a thread on our board about kind of what was transpiring on campus. Really good group that came in there. A lot of in-state prospects. Mississippi State was able to throw out some offers, allow the kids to come see the coaches and meet the staff and all that. And that was really neat. And it was really cool being able to be on campus and see those familiar faces. You know, Chad Bumpus is back in the building as the new wide receivers coach. David Turner is back for his third stint. He spent almost a decade here at Mississippi State coaching defensive lines, and he's been such a huge part of Mississippi State becoming one of the more impressive schools nationally in producing defensive linemen in the NFL. And they're all over the place. If you look at even the playoffs this year, you look at some of the guys that are on the defensive line, some of these teams, you know, we saw Jeffrey Simmons. Of course, he didn't make the playoffs, but Jeffrey Simmons had a huge year. Chris Jones, one of the best defensive tackles in the game, had a huge year. Fletcher Cox for the Eagles. Those two are both going to championship rounds next week. And it was just a huge season once again for these defensive linemen. And all of those guys had a hand on them by David Turner, whether it be in recruiting or coaching. David Turner did something for those players to help get them to the point where they're at right now. And that's a huge selling point for kids moving forward. And in a year coming up that the state of Mississippi has so many good defensive linemen, I think it's huge to have a guy like David Turner on campus. Also saw Tony Hughes, talked to him for a little bit. Of course, a longtime Mississippi State assistant, longtime coach, and tremendous ties inside the state of Mississippi. He was a guy that Zach Arnett had to have on this staff. So he comes over from the defensive side of the ball where he was with Zach Arnett. He's now coaching running backs for Mississippi State. This is the first time in his career that he's been a running backs coach. But I think that that's going to be a pretty seamless transition for Mississippi State. I think Coach Hughes will be able to coach that position fairly well. And, of course, we know what he can do recruiting-wise. He's going to have a boost, too, in that room, because Greg Knox is coming back to Mississippi State, the former running backs coach under Dan Mullen, who also went to Florida with Mullen. He was at Buffalo recently as a running backs coach. He's moved back to Starkville. He's going to be an offensive analyst, and he'll be able to add his input to the running back room, and I think that's huge for Mississippi State. I think Coach Hughes is going to be able to coach the running backs just fine, but just having that other piece in there with them I think is going to be super big for Mississippi State. The question was what was going to happen with Jason Washington, and we all thought that he was probably going to end up as a running backs coach once again for Mississippi State. Instead, Mississippi State is making him director of player development, which is also a huge part of the inner workings of the program. He's a guy that is a very big sounding piece for these players, has great relationship with the players already. I think this is huge for Mississippi State, for the whole team, to have a guy like that in that position. And to get him to agree to doing that and moving off the field, I think was big for Mississippi State. But he wants to be here. And, of course, there's always a chance that somebody could give him a coaching position and he could go follow whoever that is to a coaching position. But if you're able to keep him in this role, I think this is a role that he could flourish in. So I think that was big. Another thing that was kind of surprising to a lot of people, Mississippi State goes out and hires Mike Schmidt, the offensive line coach from Syracuse, longtime friend of Zach Arnett, former player at San Diego State University where Zach Arnett played. And, of course, they both coached together as well. So, it's a familiar piece to Zach Arnett. He knows what he can do on the offensive line. He knows what he can do as far as recruiting and developing and all that stuff. So I think that's going to be a good piece for State. So now what do they do with the offensive line? Well, Mississippi State's going to have Will Friend named the offensive line coach. He's overseeing the offensive line, but Schmidt is going to be working with the tackles and also working with the tight ends. Friend is going to focus on the offensive line, but especially on the interior linemen, it seems. So you have basically 2 offensive line coaches. Schmidt's also going to be dipping into the tight end position as well. So that's basically what your offensive crew looks like. Of course, Kevin Barbay, the offensive coordinator, is going to be coaching quarterbacks. So the offensive side of the ball is set. Defensive side of the ball is set as well. Mississippi State finally makes official Brett Dewhurst is going to be the safeties coach for the Bulldogs, elevated from a defensive analyst position. He's been a safeties coach before. He's coached defensive backs at both Texas State and Texas Tech. So this is not somebody that's getting his first job. And Zach Arnett knows coaching. He knows the defensive side of the ball. He knows what this guy can do. So you kind of got to trust him in this spot. And again, he's a guy that's coached this position before, so it's not going to be anything new to him. Darcel McBath stays at cornerbacks. Matt Brock, who was named defensive coordinator, is going to be your linebackers coach. And then, of course, in the defensive line, you got David Turner. So Eric Mealy's staying on as special teams coach. Just a really solid staff, and we've talked about it. You can go back and watch the last Talkin Dawgs that we had, and we just kind of discussed what Mississippi State has done with the staff. And I think what you have is a staff that can teach, that can develop, and that can recruit. You got State of Mississippi ties. You got guys that can recruit just about anywhere. You got guys that have taught at a very high level, guys that have evaluated at a high level. So it's just a really solid group. One of the more consistent across the board coaching staffs that I've seen at Mississippi State. Dan Mullen had some really good ones. I think this one is solid across the board. Kevin Barbay is really the big question mark for me. What is he going to do in the SEC as an offensive coordinator? But we've seen some really good things from him too, and there's no reason to believe that he can't be really good. So it's just really solid across the board. I think they're going to be able to recruit, they're going to be able to teach, and they're going to be able to develop guys. And I think that's the most important thing you're looking for out of a coaching staff, and Zach Arnett seems to have it. Now you just got to go out there and win ball games. The guys that you're going to win the ball games with, Mississippi State's got a good group. You got a lot of players coming back. This has been such a strange offseason, folks. This offseason has been unlike anything that we've ever seen. And it's been like this at a lot of places, but Mississippi State's been a lot more extreme than some of these other schools. You had Ra Thomas enter the portal. You had Xavier Thomas. You had Dylan Johnson. Dylan Johnson puts out a statement talking about Mike Leach not wanting him there, being happy that he's gone. The video comes out of Mike Leach actually saying those things. Mike Leach has heart failure and passes away. Zach Arnett elevated to coach. All these guys are announcing they're coming back. Other guys are announcing they're leaving. Mississippi State wins the bowl game, and then you have Tula Griffin jumping in the portal. You have Tula Griffin last week coming back, which I don't even know if we've talked about. So Tula Griffin enters the portal 2 weeks ago on Friday. A couple of days later, jumps back in to the roster for Mississippi State. Didn't visit anywhere. It was just a weird situation, and there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but Mississippi State worked hard to get him back on board. So you got both Tula Griffin and Xavier Thomas, your 2 top return guys, getting in the portal and now getting back on the roster. And now you got Dylan Johnson, who we were hearing last week Mississippi State was really working to try to get back on board. We've been reporting on this pretty steadily since last week. I think we were the first people to start talking about this, about how Mississippi State really wanted him. And we were the first people to report this weekend that he was on campus. Visited South Carolina and Ole Miss the past couple of weeks, and he was on campus this past weekend at Mississippi State, talking to coaches, talking to players. had some great conversations with some guys that are transferring to Mississippi State, which we'll talk about shortly. But he is a huge priority for Mississippi State because he's a fourth-year running back that was a big part of Mississippi State over the last 3 years, has been a big part of things in the receiving game, the rushing game, blocking. I mean, he's just a gritty guy, and this coaching staff and these players want him back on board. And with a change of offense and, water under the bridge with everything that happened last month, that's become intriguing for Dillon Johnson. And the way that things are leaning right now, I'm leaning towards Dillon Johnson returning to Mississippi State. We'll see how that transpires. It's going to be up to him. I think it's going to be a situation where he's going to have to put away any bad feelings that he has about the whole situation that happened. He's going to have to look at the offense and say, I could be a big part of this. He could very well say that he doesn't want to do that. He wants to move on and do something else, and he has some options available to him. But I think that he's a little conflicted right now, and I think that Mississippi State is a serious option for him, and that's good news for Mississippi State. You go into the spring with guys like Jaquavius Marks, Dillon Johnson, Simeon Price, on top of the top JUCO back in the country, and Jeffrey Pittman, and a true freshman, and Seth Davis that's an electrifying runner. And this offense all of a sudden looks really good for Mississippi State and what they're wanting to do under Kevin Barbay. So it would be huge to get Dillon Johnson back. And then you're looking at that transfer portal being a tremendous win for Mississippi State in the offseason. At that point, the only guy that you lost that you really didn't want to lose was Ra Thomas. The other guys were transferring, looking for more playing time. Some walk-ons looking for better opportunities. Javon Banks was a piece that I thought could be a really good depth piece for Mississippi State on the defensive line, but not a starter, and he was kind of hovering around too deep. So for the most part, Ra Thomas, if you get Dillon Johnson, Ra Thomas is the only guy that you really lose off of that offense, and you added a big piece on Sunday in the receiving room, so you kind of reset there. And if that's the case, the guys that you get back on defense, the guys you're getting back on offense, Mississippi State goes into 2023 looking like an intriguing team in the SEC West. And there's been a little bloom off the rose of Mississippi State of late from a national perspective and regional perspective. I think a lot of that has to do with the first-year coach and Zach Arnett coming in. You lost Mike Leach. If Mike Leach was still with Mississippi State and still here with us, I think Mississippi State would be considered top half of the SEC West, up there competing for the SEC West with what they got coming back. But I think there's just a lot of unknowns from people outside the program of what Mississippi State has. But for us that are following the program, this looks like a team that could be really good next year. And they're adding some good pieces out of the transfer portal to fill holes. Now you're basically looking at, you need to get a tight end probably, and Rylan Good is from Georgia, is a guy that they're looking at there. And we'll have some more information on him too. But two big pieces that State added on Sunday out of the transfer portal. Freddie Roberson, the wide receiver from Eastern Washington, I think over 700, close to 800 yards maybe receiving last year. Had a big season for Eastern Washington. Nice physical receiver. He can go up and win battles in one-on-one situations. I think that was a huge get for Mississippi State to add a good experienced receiver that can win you some battles on the outside after losing an outside receiver in Ra Thomas. Also got their quarterback out of the portal, Mike Wright from Vanderbilt, who was considered a Boston College lean last week, decided to up and visit Mississippi State, had a huge visit this weekend, decides to commit to Mississippi State. And that adds competition in the quarterback room with Will Rogers, but it also adds some depth, because if something happens to Will Rogers, all you have behind him is a true freshman in Chris Parson, who everybody's excited about, but he's coming off an injury. We don't know where he is in recovering from that. And you don't, quite frankly, you don't want to throw a true freshman into the mix in the SEC. So it would be great to redshirt him, to bring him along slowly and get him prepared for when Will Rogers goes out the door. And Mike Wright has an opportunity, too, to compete with Will Rogers, push him a little bit. If he doesn't win the starting job, you have a guy that you can use in certain packages, whether in the goal line or running packages. You can still utilize Mike Wright this year, and I think it's a good fit for Mississippi State to get an experienced SEC quarterback into the mix to add to that depth in the quarterback room, which was lacking up until this week. So two big gets for Mississippi State from the offensive perspective. And an interesting thing that we got out of Paul Jones' story with Freddie Roberson, you can go read that for free right now on 247. Freddie Roberson said he hung out a lot with Dylan Johnson this week and even called Dylan Johnson one of the MSU running backs. I think they had some good conversations. I think Dylan gave him some good advice from what we were told. So that could be, a little bit of a foreshadowing with Dylan. We'll see how that transpires. One thing to note is we're closing in on the add drop date at Mississippi State for classes. And I think that's coming up this week, maybe Monday. So there's a little wiggle room there. There's Mississippi State and other colleges have been known to get some guys in even after that. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal if somebody doesn't enroll tomorrow on Monday. But it's closing in on time where they need to start finalizing some things there so you can get those guys in class, you can get them in and all that. Mike Wright, I think, is starting class this week at Mississippi State, should be. I think Freddie Roberson is going to start classes soon, has to go back to Washington, probably move his stuff. And then Dylan, I got to think that Dylan is going to make a decision here pretty soon. So we'll see how all that transpires. So that's kind of it on the football side of things for Mississippi State. Like I said, they're down to a couple of positions of need, well, really just a couple of spots, maybe 2 tight ends. I don't know of anybody else that you really go after at this point. I think that you still got a pretty good roster at this point. You probably need a tight end or 2, and that might be it. State's in pretty good shape. Defense is set up for success. Offense set up for success. They got their special teams guys, so really good job by Mississippi State. Real quick on the basketball side of things, tough week for Mississippi State men. Lost to a really good Tennessee team. I thought Mississippi State played well in that ball game, just couldn't hit the shots down the stretch or get the stops they needed either against Tennessee. And Tennessee was down a couple of guys, but that roster's so good. They just had the next man up mentality, and they were able to capitalize on that. So tough loss there, an even tougher loss against Florida on Saturday night. They lost by 2 points, had a chance to tie the ball game in the last possession, just couldn't make a shot there. So the team's lost 6 out of 7 games after starting the year 11-0. Really tough stretch for Mississippi State here. They played some really good teams, but they're struggling. They're struggling to find their confidence, struggling to find a lot of an identity on the offensive side of the ball. But I really believe Chris Jans has this team in position to succeed. They just haven't been able to execute at a high level. And it might not happen this year. Time's running out. They're going to have to win stack some wins down the stretch and win a lot of games. And right now it's not looking good. But you win some games down the stretch, we'll see what happens. But if not, I don't think all is lost with Chris Jans. I think that the future is still very bright, but there's a lot of work to do, especially with the roster. For the women, they get 2 wins. Mississippi State beat Auburn by 14 points on Thursday. That was a kind of a little uncomfortable game for Mississippi State's own liking for most of the ball game, but they were able to pull away in the 4th. And then just a classic thriller on Sunday against Kentucky. That's always a tough matchup for Mississippi State. They always have some battles with Kentucky, and Kentucky's won, I think, 3 in a row coming into Sunday's game. The Bulldogs were able to get a 77-76 win in that ball game. Jessica Carter with 21 points and 8 rebounds. She has 8 straight games of 10 or more points. In 5 of those games, she scored 20. So she's really starting to hit a next level, probably the best she's been playing as a Mississippi State Bulldog, and playing up to an all-conference standard. She's definitely been one of the best bigs in the SEC this year, and they're going to need to continue that moving into next week. Also, Anastasia Hayes, huge game. She didn't play against Auburn for personal reasons. She comes back on Sunday. She scored 15, I think, in the second half, had 17 in the ball game, 4 rebounds, was just huge for State. I thought she was playing a lot like herself. She has not really been herself this year, and a lot of that is what they're doing with her offensively. They're getting a lot more people involved. Last year, she was really a focal point of that offense. They had to have her be. But this year has been more of a pass-first player. On Sunday, she really took charge in that second half, and I thought she was huge. Hit 9 of 10 free throws, just really big down the stretch. So State's won 3 straight games. They're sitting at 15-5 now, 4-3 in conference play. They need a few more wins to seal up an NCAA tournament berth, but right now sitting in a good spot. They're going to have to win some games down the stretch, just like the men. They're in a better spot than the men are at this point, but Big game coming up on Thursday at 8 p.m. at Ole Miss, trying to get some revenge in that ball game. Ole Miss was able to win at Mississippi State earlier this year, so if the Bulldogs win that, they're on a 4-game winning streak in SEC play and probably getting closer and closer to the top 25 if they keep up this current run that they're in. 16-5 would be pretty sharp for the Bulldogs. So that's what they're shooting for right now. But State playing a little inconsistent at times, but I think that you're seeing some potential with this team too. This team can be really good if things come together. I think Sam Purcell's had a pretty good first year already. He's already tied as many wins as they had last season. And one more win could get them more wins than Mississippi State's had in 4 years. So they got a chance to do that on Sunday. All right, guys, great chat with you guys. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you aren't already. We have typically every week we have a live chat. Probably not going to do it this week. We might later in the week. We'll see how that goes. But usually have a live chat where you guys can talk back and forth with me. Of course, we have press conferences on here, media availabilities, and things of that nature. So plenty of things for every Mississippi State fan to check out. But I appreciate you guys. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for checking us out over there at 247 Sports. And if you aren't, make sure you're doing it because we've been ahead of most of the news here regarding Mississippi State over the last few years, really. We've really put together a great staff, and I feel like we have the lead coverage on Mississippi State sports. So come check us out over there if you aren't already. All right, guys, appreciate you. Hope you guys have a great week coming up, and we'll talk to you down the road.